Hello, Happy Hermit here to have a conversation with you about books, literature, and anything else under the sun. I know there are plenty of literature podcasts and web shows out there, absolutely tons of reviews from people of all ages and walks of life. It's wonderful how much I can hear about everything from fan fiction to literary award winners in a way I never had growing up. But I'm not here to do that. I'm not going to review the books I talk about here. In fact, just assume a read is recommended. Any piece of literature is the beginning of a conversation, and while I see plenty of people talking about whether you should start the conversation in the first place, I see very few actually continuing it. Books are supposed to be interactive works. Min-Jin Lee, the author of Pachinko, has a copy of Middlemarch that has so many notes in it that the original text is almost completely obscured. That's the way to read a book. You don't just leave the text pristine like a field of fresh snow. You write in it, you ask questions, and if the book is worthy, it will meet you and answer you back. It is in this spirit that I wish to have discussions here with you. Today, we're discussing Jon Fosse's Septology. I want to warn you that I'm not proficient in Norwegian and there will be spoilers. Not much happens in Septology. We follow Asla, an artist in Norway, going through the Advent season as he considers spending Christmas with his neighbor's family. Here's the publisher's description. Quote, "The celebrated Norwegian novelist's magnum opus, shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, published in one volume for the first time. What makes us who we are, and why do we lead one life and not another? Asla, an aging painter and widower who lives alone on the southwest coast of Norway, is reminiscing about his life. His only friends are his neighbor, Aslake, a traditional fisherman-farmer, and Beyer, a gallerist who lives in the city. There lives another Asla, also a painter, but lonely and consumed by alcohol. Asla and Asla are doppelgangers, two versions of the same person, two versions of the same life, both grappling with existential questions about death, love, light and shadow, faith and hopelessness. Jon Fosse's Septology is a transcendent exploration of the human condition and a radically other reading experience, incantatory, hypnotic, and utterly unique." End quote. Whew, sounds like a lot to digest, doesn't it? The thing is, it's not really that hard, and I'm here to help. Just pull up a chair and with a cup of something warm, you'll need it, and let's get to talking. Septology is stream of consciousness writing, which means it's imitating how human thought works. In this book, human thought is one long sentence that only pauses at the end of the day to continue the next. We don't even get a period at the end of life. But how do you read such a thing? Many people read a book like it's instructions for a build-your-own movie, so you read "The barn is red," and you imagine a red barn in your head. Another way people sometimes read is to insert themselves directly into the story, seeking a window character that allows them to be part of the drama. Neither of these approaches will work well here. Septology is essentially a thought transcript, so you read it as if they were your own thoughts. Here's a sample. Quote, "It's important that the whole show is like a single picture, because as soon as someone comes into the room, they should feel like they've entered into a picture. The room itself should be like a picture you can enter into. He doesn't know what exactly makes it that way. It's not something to put into words, because you can't put what a good picture says into words. And as for my pictures, the closest he can get is to say that there's an approaching distance, something far away that gets closer. In my pictures, it's as if something imperceptible becomes perceptible, and yet still stays imperceptible. It's still hidden. It is something staying hidden, if you can say it that way. My pictures kind of talk to the person looking, and at the same time it's impossible to say what the picture says, because it's a silent kind of talking to you." End quote. So you'd read this like you were the person thinking these things. You're an artist thinking about having an art show and how you want that art to impact the viewer. I wonder how an audio version of this book would go if read in a certain way by a talented reader. Maybe it's an easier way to go about it. I imagine a low-key drone streaming through earpods, following phrase after phrase in the background on loop. It'd be quite like the internal narrative we all have running within us at any given moment. I find that's the most productive way to read this. You won't go through understanding every single phrase. The text meanders between thinking about the here and now world, to memory, to imaginings, to internal dialogue, without a formal transition, because this is how thinking works. Keep in mind, Asla might not even be aware of every moment of this internal dialogue. There are moments where Aslak, his best friend, catches Asla talking to himself. So Asla is clearly not always mindful. His awareness constantly switching from internal to external and back again. I don't want you to get hung up on understanding every little bit. If Asla doesn't do this stuff for himself, we can't be expected to. Besides, if this is your first read of the book, well, the first read of the book is like a visit to a new city. You can't be expected to see everything the city has to offer. You go to the major attractions, the good restaurants. You're wanting to come and see the sights, not map out the place in every minor detail. Listen to this. Quote, "There's a pause, and I take off my shoulder bag too, and put it down on the chair next to me, and I look around at the other people in the alehouse, sitting with their beer and tobacco in front of them like a fragile line of defense against the world, clinging to their cigarettes, their pints as they sit there, and the sea inside them is large, whether stormy or calm, as they sit there and wait for the next and last crossing they'll set out on, the one that will never end, that they'll never come back from, and they don't feel fear. It'll be how it is and how it has to be. It must have a meaning, yes. Our Lord must have given it meaning, they think. He writes straight on crooked lines, they think. Or anyway, the good Lord is part of it all somehow, and it's the devil who made the lines crooked, they think. And they hold on to their cigarettes and pints, and they say a silent prayer, a prayer more like a lookout over that sea. The prayer extends, entirely wordless, because the words will be left behind, definitely. But there must be a part for people like them too, they're probably thinking. And then they feel a prick of something like fear, so they raise their pint and have a taste of beer, the good old taste. It gives them a sense of security, I think, and I see Asla raise his pint and take a gulp of beer." End quote. One important factor of this book are doppelgangers. They're doubles of the same character, sort of like a non-birth twin. It's a common sitcom trope of a character running into a mirror image of themselves, and of course comic situations arise. Shakespeare does it in The Two Gentlemen of Verona with the conceit of separated twins. David Lynch uses doppelgangers as a focus of discomfort, the uncanny sensation of running into someone who is you and not you at the same time. In this case, it's more like a funhouse mirror where good characters become bad and the dead come to life. Fosse does this in Septology. Asla has the namesake, another character with exactly the same name who is also a successful artist, who seems to be a direct contrast. As Asla quit drinking, the namesake is still an active alcoholic. Asla has his relationship with Alice, which appeared to have lasted, but no kids, while the namesake has at least 2 exes and estranged children. But it isn't even as simple as that. We have doppelgangers everywhere. Alice is just Alsa spelled differently, and he sees mirrors of himself in everybody he encounters other than perhaps Bragi the dog. We have 2 gurus, women who seem to want to create a connection with Alsa that he's ambivalent about. His best friend is Aslak. The point is, the world Asla sees is just an extension of himself. Everybody is a mirror. I think of this quote from the film Drive My Car. Quote, "But even if you think you know someone well, even if you love that person deeply, you can't completely look into that person's heart. You'll just feel hurt. But if you put in enough effort, you should be able to look into your own heart pretty well. So in the end, what we should be doing is to be true to our hearts and come to terms with it in a capable way. If you really want to look at someone, then your only option is to look at yourself squarely and deeply." End quote. Your ability to know somebody is dependent on your ability to know yourself, because you only understand others on your own terms. When you explain to yourself why people do what they do, you're really imagining what would make you do what they do. You are the lens through which you see the world, so what you see in others are parts most in common with you. Now I can hear someone disagree with me sharply. What about when somebody is a monster? I think you can objectively look at somebody with a cool mind, separate yourself from the equation, and decide if someone is harmful or not. But that word monster, isn't that an emotional term? And an emotional reaction isn't the result of analysis, it's an act of recognition. You see yourself and are rejecting it. Quote, "And I see myself standing and looking at the picture with the 2 lines that cross near the middle, and it's morning, and today's Thursday, and I've lit the stove, and the room is starting to get warm. And yesterday I drove to Bjorvin and delivered my paintings to Bayer, I think, and I feel exhausted, and I stand in front of the easel, and I look at these 2 lines that cross near the middle, one brown and one purple, and I think that I don't like this picture, because I can't stand pictures that directly paint feelings even if I'm the only one that knows it. That isn't the kind of thing I paint. It's not the kind of thing I want to paint, because a painting can certainly be filled with feelings, but you shouldn't paint feelings themselves, like screaming and weeping and wailing, I think. And I think that this was truly a bad painting. That's what it is. But at the same time, it's what it needs to be, what it's going to be. It's done, and there's no more to do on it. And I hear Oslake say, St. Andrew's Cross, emphasizing the words. He says it with pride, emphasizing them. End quote. One reason you don't have to completely digest every piece of information is that Fosse's voice tends to move in circles. Anything important will come back again, like a symphony goes back to themes, or a hymn returns to its chorus. Sometimes it's external, like having the same conversations with Oslake that sound almost scripted. That's how we talk to people we see every day. Pay attention to how many times you repeat the same conversations with those that you come into contact regularly. This is far from a bad thing. It becomes a rite, a symbol of your connection to this other person, whether that be an often repeated joke or discussing the weather. Septology is exploring the mystic banality of everyday life. Here, life is not primarily made up of significant events, but of little repetitions. Rather than a thunderbolt, we get a stream following the same path, but that stream can form canyons given enough time. Asla also shows repetitions when having difficulty with a subject. We see him repeatedly approach the idea of Alice, his wife who died, then draw away again because it's too much and tends to overwhelm. In fact, one way to mark the development of this talent is to see how closely he can approach the memory of her. He has to mentally go through the deaths of several people, past and present, to be able to approach her death, and his life ends shortly thereafter. Fosse constantly speaks of the light that shines in darkness. In painting, that is his definition of good art. He speaks of the meaning that comes from between images, using language to explore this concept beyond what happens next. It's why every part begins with Asla looking at his painting, referred to as St. Andrew's Cross. While he doesn't always like it, he can't help but acknowledge its totemic power. This view of art is difficult to explain to someone who has never experienced it, and perhaps some people never do, but it's a great yes that gives the piece weight, a force that changes you. It feels like another sort of recognition. All you think is, yes, this is it, yes. These are the moments that lift us outside the dreariness of everyday existence. Yet they're not enough. Asla starts each part with the painting, but ends each part in prayer. This isn't like Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. This is liturgical prayer, said in the same words to worry beads, some of it in Latin, repeated pleas for God's help. The Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary, they were replacements for his drinking, encouraged by Alice because when he was drinking, he could neither enjoy his life or his art. I am not Catholic and not in a position to intelligently comment on the Catholic influences here, but I can say the rites give comfort and meaning through repetition. They give the hand and mind something to do, a focus point just as Asla has in his window overlooking the sea. Quote, and she says that she's been thinking about it for a long time, but she hasn't brought herself to ask him about it because he'd been having a hard time since, Mother says. And she breaks off, and then there's a long silence, and Asla thinks, why did Mother have to remind him about Sister again? About how she was gone so suddenly, how she just died, was just lying there dead in her bed one morning. Yes, the thought of his sister Alida just lying there and dead, he can't take it. Anyway, Mother says. And Asla notices that Mother is about to start crying. Unquote. Death for Fosse is the finishing point for a lifelong transition from the physical to the spiritual. This process begins at birth. If you think of his painting, it's a big X essentially. It can represent a crossroads, the threshold of revelation, as Tony Kushner puts it in Angels in America, where the physical and spiritual exist briefly in the same space. Life starts as physical. A baby is all kicking legs and nursing, growing to take in the world and be shaped by it. Even young adults are attached to the flesh. Sex, intoxication, movement. Asla expresses this in his art, where his early pieces are literal representations of farmhouses that gradually get abstracted. The progression is from a house and barn to an X. Some people never progress beyond the physical. Asla's mother keeps insisting on him making a painting of her house, and in another section he gives a friend an abstracted painting that I suspect he either pawned off or threw away. That lack of progress shows up in other ways. The namesake's inability to kick alcoholism and affairs, the old landlady that he paints in her bed, Guru constantly referring to a romantic fling which Asla either forgot about or never really happened. These people trapped in their bodies grow as miserably as a plant stuck in a pot that's too small. They lack space to grow into. In Sailing to Byzantium by Yeats, we find the line, "No country for old men." The film of the same name has tainted this line a bit, making it about violence and your ability to defend yourself, but in the context of the poem, this country of young people isn't violent, just intensely physical, largely concerned about sensation and propagation. The only reason violence exists here is because people aren't developed enough to use their ideas instead of their fists. It's a world of constant springtime, like in Bambi, where everybody is Twitter-pated and nobody's interested in ideas. At that time of life, it's good and necessary to be that way. We need new generations and people to make the wheels of progress turn. But that's just the first stage of life. Being stuck there makes a person wither as they age. As Yeats says, quote, "An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul claps its hands and sing, and louder sing, for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school, but studying, monuments of its own magnificence." End quote. If you don't grow, you fade. You are neither child nor man, the 40-year-old at the college party, or like in I Saw the TV Glow, the person whose voice never develops, trapped in a world of pretending. If you've ever read Dante's Divine Comedy, the most famous section being the Inferno, you may remember Beatrice, his long-lost love, who inspires Dante to go on his journey through the afterlife. In Septology, Asla has Alice, who is currently dead for an undisclosed amount of time, and he is still mourning her, replaying interactions with her. We see her exclusively in idealized memories, playing over and over like the prayers he ends each day with. In a way, he's the line in St. Andrew's Cross going from life to death, while she's reaching across from the opposite direction, still influencing and challenging him from the grave. It's no coincidence that she has her own art, humble icons, not lucrative like Asla's work, perhaps, but spiritually valuable. His relationship to her is almost like one with a saint, holding her high above him to keep him on the straight and narrow. Remember, Beatrice is Dante's muse. He was literally willing to walk through hell for her, and through love he gets access to the entire cosmos. It elevates him not only in the sense of inspiring better behavior, but also because it gives him a touch of immortality, and through bringing this story back to the real world, he creates his legacy. This is why I like his friendship with Aslake. While Alice is idealized to the point of being a legless angel, Aslake is human and solid. Nobody knows Asla better than him. Their repeated conversations are different kinds of prayer. On several occasions, Aslake takes care of the physical things, making sure Asla has put wood in the stove to heat his house and is eating something. He is a caretaker in the full sense of the word, but despite that, they have a mildly competitive relationship. Aslake seems to have that constant need to both one-up and dismiss Asla, calling him a papist and insinuating that he's overeducated. Yet Aslake also is the best judge of Asla's work because he knows Asla so well. He always picks out the best pieces for his sister. It's fascinating that Aslake gives a piece of artwork to his sister every Christmas, a woman who lives a very modest life. Her house is full of these paintings, yet she still wants more. On the other end is Bayer, the gallerist, who knows the quality of Asla's work because he's an expert. Their relationship is coolly professional, perhaps with a slight paternalism right below the surface. Most discussion of Asla's father ends after Bayer enters his life. All we hear about Asla's father from that point on is that he builds boats, but nobody wants wooden boats anymore. And then the namesake as a constant source of worry. Asla finds him passed out in the snow, lost to alcoholism, then brings him to a hospital where he dies. One interpretation is one is the dream of the other, the Asla we're following being an imagining of the Asla once he's admitted. Before the namesake is checked in, we see the world from both their points of view, but once in the hospital, he disappears, mentioned only in memories and phone calls. Highlights magazine has an old strip called Goofus and Gallant, where Goofus would do things like tread dirt in the room and Gallant would wipe his feet at the door. You could certainly see these two Oslas as Goofus and Gallant versions of the same person. But isn't it reductive to do that? However their lives may have been different, and whatever choices they made, they're both ending up at the same destination, dying in a space that is not theirs. You can't even say the sober Osla extended his life by much through good behavior. It's unsurprising the story is set in winter, the season of death, where bare trees stand over frozen rivers and snow erases everything. I still remember as a child watching the line from a whiteout storm approaching from the horizon, swallowing everything in its path until it got to my window, turning it into a completely blank square. But winter is also, in the Christian tradition, the celebration of birth. It is when we string lights to fight against the darkness and celebrate goodwill and cheer. The designers of these celebrations knew what they were doing, pushing against the gloom and cheerlessness of deep winter and the coldness of heart. Quote, "And then they stand there, holding hands, and sister says that they've done something they're not allowed to do. Hasn't mother said over and over that they mustn't walk down that country road," she says. And Asla says, "Yes, well." And he says if they listen to everything mother says, then they'd never be able to do anything at all practically, he says. And then they just stand there, and then they see the front door of the blue house open, and someone comes out, and it's a man, and he has a big belly and a hat on, and he turns around to shut the door, and then he walks on the gravel path to the road, and there's a crunching sound when he walks, and sister whispers, "They need to leave. Her dress is so dirty," she says. End quote. William Faulkner famously quoted, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." That is the world that Asla lives in. Very early in the book, a playground sets him on a memory trip of a romantic encounter with Alice. We don't read it as a flashback, we read it as something happening right now, because in your head a memory can have as much power as sensory input. To our synapses, it makes no difference if what we're focusing on is a dream, a memory, or the real world. They're all recreations in our own mind. As the book goes on, Asla falls into memory more and more frequently with no boundaries between past and present. Outside a general idea of how old Asla is, it's difficult to tell how long ago events occurred. Did Alice die recently, or has it been years? His memories are not ordered by time, but by intensity. Something 20 years ago could be clearer than something that's happening right now. It's tricky because relationships once formed are eternal. Asla's conversations with Alice continue, even though she's passed and her body is no longer there. Quote, "And I sit and look at my spot out there on the water. I look at the waves and I see Alice and Elsa walk along the wharf, and I think that Alice and I weren't given that many years together, but I'm grateful for the years we did have, I think. And Alice is sitting next to me and we're holding hands, and I feel her so close, I think. And I still haven't taken off my black coat, and I still haven't lit the stove. It's crazy, I think. And I look at my landmark on the water, at the waves there, and I sit and hold Alice's hand, and we stay sitting like that for a long time, just holding hands, and then Alice lets go of my hand, and I look at the waves, and I see Asla standing there." End quote. Also says at some point that the two things a man needs for a happy life are a dog and a boat. By the end of the book, he has the dog and is well on his way to procuring the boat. Now, obviously, everybody doesn't want those specific things. They represent elements of a happy life. A pet typically means something dependent on you that provides companionship without judgment. I don't know why Bragi, the dog, is so likable. We only ever see him taken on walks and fed, but every scene he's in is automatically livelier. Bragi forces Asla to exist in the immediate present. The boat is a focus on labor. Asla's father builds boats for a living. It's a way to both connect to the world and drift off from it. In Asla's world, cars don't hold that distinction, not only because in wintertime weather they're stressful to drive, but it's a very purposeful way to travel. One cannot drift in a car or travel sideways. One irony is Asla talks about how dangerous boating is, but once in the water, proceeds to drink and not take it at all seriously. Boating is about following the current rather than making a path. Passivity helps. The boat journey at the end parallels death, riding the river Styx and having conversations with the dead. Asla interrupts Asla several times in conversations with Alice. Asla is uninterested in making his life any bigger than it already is. He's like most people, knowing people through his family and work, maybe having a couple of outside friends. This doesn't make his life smaller. Asla isn't the sort who believes, like Sartre, that hell is other people, just that it's more satisfying to know a few people well than a lot of people superficially. Look at his friendship with Aslak. Yes, they exasperate each other, but only because they are so close. It makes me happy that they both cook each other a meal for Christmas, lutefisk at one person's house, lamb at the other. They do this every year. Fosse's Septology shows life as a great opening up, where your body is a mere shell from which your spirit emerges. To close, I'd like to just note that I left this book having a very clear idea in my head what Asla looks like, even though the only bit of description we get is that he has long hair. I see a serene, though somewhat troubled face, and eyes with a tendency to look inward more than out. I see kindness and gentleness. I also see a beard, a stocky physique, an awkward gait. To close, I like to keep track of what food happens in books. It's just my little quirk. While there are the lamb ribs and the lutefisk, what I'd most like to try from this book is the open-faced hot beef sandwich he has at the bus cafe. It sounds like the most perfectly cozy thing to eat on a cold winter's day. I look forward to hearing about your thoughts on this book. Happy reading!